The house was originally built between 1804 and 1808. It was demolished in the 1950s and recreated as a house museum, so it could really be everyone's house on the Hudson. And music was very much a part of the story in the early 1800s, and it's still a part of our story now. This beautiful drawing room is where the owner would have shown their most lavish, most sumptuous objects, and where they would have entertained friends and family. The rear parlor is where they would have, or drawing room is where they would have gathered, and it served more like a family room, so more intimate gatherings. They could have closed that space off and kept it warm. They could have used it as more private space. But here you have the most glorious object behind us is a new acquisition for Boscobel. It is an 18-teens piano made by the firm Gibson and Davis. They were two London immigrants that came to New York in the early 1800s, part of a wave of British-born piano makers who were responding to the popularity of having a piano in your home. The outgrowth, we think, of this popularity for pianos and instruments and performance in New York, some historians have argued comes out of New York's role during the American Revolution as the stronghold for the British Army. So there were lots of musical performances during that time of British occupation in the 1770s and 80s, and this interest and center of music production, music interest in New York, some historians argue is an outgrowth of that New Yorkers were particularly interested in classical music. We believe, because it was standard practice for women in particular to be well versed with musical instruments, and so part of growing into a helpmate and a social asset as a woman was learning how to play an instrument, either piano or a harp, a flute, and yes, it was definitely amateur performance. And throughout the Hudson Valley, for the most part, I think that was probably what would have happened, was that you had amateur performers. You'd have some, on occasion, traveling musicians for things like festivals. But for the most part, if you heard music, you were in the home of someone who had trained at least a little bit in making music, or you had to be within earshot of one of these newfangled barrel organs, which was very much like the boombox of 1800. The barrels that go to the barrel organ, you'll see each one has a set number of songs. That's it. Those maybe 40 songs, that's all it could play for you. That's it. Either you had to have the barrel, and that, of course, I'm sure multiplied the number of songs that you could hear in this house. So it is an interesting thing that you think about. Just access to music was so much less, but it was no less valued.